So exactly how many times have you darkened your skin with makeup in an act that you have yourself described as racist?
I shared the moments that I recollected, but I recognize that it is something absolutely unacceptable to do. And yeah, I appreciate calling it makeup, but it was blackface. And that is just not right.
No kidding. Dressing up in blackface is not right. And yet, Canada's Prime Minister did exactly that. Not once, not twice, but at least 3 times. So, is he going to resign? No, far from it. The election's coming up in a few weeks, and he's still fighting for a second term. Now, this scandal would have sunk most politicians, but this former drama teacher always seems to know just how to act.
Blackface.
Blackface.
Blackface. Blackface makeup.
The first photo came from Time magazine. It shows a 29-year-old Trudeau dressed as Aladdin at an Arabian Nights-themed party in 2001.
He was 29 years old. Yeah. He was a teacher. That's a grown man.
Now, Trudeau is facing demands from his main rival that he step down.
A complete lack of judgment and integrity.
Trudeau built his reputation on supporting diversity.
I should have known better, but I didn't, and I'm really sorry.
Trudeau came out to apologize for one blackface and ended up admitting to more.
When I was in high school, I dressed up at a talent show and sang Dale with makeup on.
And now, if you'll excuse me, daylight's coming and me want to go home.
It's either frankly ignorant or disingenuous, and I'm not sure which is worse.
I think it's insulting. I think it's offensive.
Global News has uncovered a 3rd instance of racially charged images of Liberal leader Justin Trudeau.
You can have a look. It's pretty grainy. You can see that he has blackface makeup on. It's covering his face, neck, his arms and hands, and you can see between the tears in his jeans there that he also appears to have the makeup down his legs as well.
How many times have you worn blackface? Probably right around 0.
How many times? Is it just the 3 that we know about? Or 3 times? More than 3 times? Yes or no, sir?
Have you since been made aware or remembered of other instances, and if so, how many?
I think I am wary of being definitive about this because the recent pictures that came out, I had not remembered. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Prime Minister,
thank you.
Who exactly is clapping a world leader who can't remember how many times he dressed up in blackface? Let's discuss this with our panel now. And up there in the top left, we have Besma Momani, a professor of political science in Ontario. Well, to her right, we have the journalist Andre Demise. And down there to the left, we have Chris Alexander, a former minister under the previous Conservative government. What I would like just to put to you all is the possibly 3, or maybe later we'll find a 4th option of what would explain this, OK? So some people think the pictures and the video mean that Justin Trudeau is a racist. And we've heard this especially from Conservative commentators. Others, including Trudeau, have said he was ignorant, unaware of how offensive it was. Still others have said it wasn't really considered racist back in 2001, and society has changed since then. Well, as I mentioned, just for the record, Justin Trudeau has picked option 2.
Was this photo racist in your opinion?
Yes. Yes, it was. I didn't consider it a racist action at the time, but now we know better, and this was something that was unacceptable, and yes, racist.
Let's go up to Andre Demise for a moment. Andre, do you believe him when he says, I wasn't aware of it at the time, but now we know better?
No, absolutely not. Not only is blackface known to be racist in Canada, it's been known since the 1840s. On the 14th of October, 1841, a group of 28 Black people, leaders in the community, wrote a petition to the mayor of Toronto to ask the mayor to stop a blackface performance from happening in Toronto. Now, it happened regardless, and there have been dozens and dozens of incidents since then, not only in Toronto, but in Canada as a whole. But we've always understood blackface to be wrong. We understand where minstrel shows come from, and the idea that just because it didn't happen in the United States means that there's a different context to it is absolute bunk. We've always known that blackface is wrong in this country.
Besma, I see you nodding your head, but you do have some sympathy with Trudeau's remark that he didn't know at the time.
Well, I mean, I'm not in his mind. I can just say that the action was racist, without a doubt. And I agree with everything Andre said. The reality is, I think many people don't believe that Trudeau is racist. His behavior was racist, but I don't think he is racist. And I think the polling numbers show that, in the sense that many people are still standing behind the Liberal Party and Trudeau. And this is not to diminish the awfulness of what we saw. And certainly I hope he continues to seek forgiveness and learn from it. But I don't think many people are going to switch allegiances because of what he did.
I've heard it said, especially about Donald Trump, for example, that when a man does racist things, he's a racist. But you don't believe that's true of Justin Trudeau?
I think many people are giving...
no, not many people. Besma, what do you think?
I don't think he's a racist. I think the policies that he has purported for the past 4 years shows that he's the first government in power that has actually done something to promote diversity and inclusiveness. And the sad reality, not to say that it's true, but the alternative, which we have to say is the most viable, which is the Conservative Party,
right.
His predecessor, Andrew Scheer's predecessor, Harper, and the current Conservative lot, people still believe fundamentally are racist to the bone.
Well,
and that's not necessarily true, but it's the perception.
Let's bring in,
perception is important.
Let's bring in our Conservative then, Chris Alexander. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's absurd to argue that this is the first government in Canadian history to do anything about diversity or the fight against racism, because it's been going on since the 1840s. In the 1790s, Upper Canada was the first jurisdiction in the entire British Empire to adopt legislation that started to end the reality of slavery, which was a reality here for decades even after that period. And Conservative governments, Liberal governments, have taken action to make this the relatively tolerant, relatively strongly multicultural and diverse society that it is today. What I'm sick of is seeing a prime minister who hasn't lived those values now pretending that he is the champion of those values and the only champion. It was he who tarred the previous government with this charge of racism. It was his team that has been about as bare-knuckled as I've ever seen in the history of Canadian politics. And for him to deflect attention to this atrocious record of his own by saying, I didn't know it was racist at the time, but we know better now. I'm sorry. We Canadians have always known it was wrong. Justin Trudeau didn't know it was wrong as recently as 2001, and that really disqualifies him from speaking credibly on these issues, and indeed from being Prime Minister.
Besma, if you don't believe that Justin Trudeau is racist, how do you explain his actions in the 90s and then again 2001?
Sheer stupidity. I mean, that's the only word I can use. It was a stupid thing to do. It would be a stupid thing back then, just as it would be today. It's, I think, absolutely disgusting. It is racist.
A very prominent
behavior.
A very prominent journalist called Warren Kinsella says, to your point, that the Liberal Party's popularity hasn't really suffered much. He says it's because voters don't think he's a racist, they think he's an idiot, and they knew that when they voted for him. Do you agree?
I think there's some truth to that.
I was going to say this is pretty interesting on both counts because Besma and Chris, I mean, you know, respect to you both, but Chris, I find it a little bit laughable that you would say, you know, this has been the most bare knuckle that we've seen, or that previous governments, you know, haven't supported, you know, racism this way or supported a candidate this way. I mean, Chris, you were on the docket that helped produce what was called the Barbaric Cultural Practices Hotline. i.e. if you suspected your neighbor was engaged in what the government called barbaric cultural practices, and I think they narrowed it down to female genital mutilation, forced marriages, etc., even though these things are already illegal, your government tried to push through a hotline for people to call and snitch on their neighbors. We ended up being called the Brown People Snitch Line. And Besma, I'm a little bit surprised to hear that coming from you. I mean, people are saying that they still support this government, but keep in mind the Abacus data or the Abacus poll that just came out recently that showed people who said, I either don't like what he did, but he apologized properly and I can move on from this, or who said, I don't find this to be a problem at all. The people who entered that direction in the survey were overwhelmingly liberal. The people who said that this is absolutely insulting and lowers my image of him were overwhelmingly conservative. And I think what this kind of boils down to is that we're held hostage to an electoral system first past the post, which if you admit this is a problem for me, I don't like what he did, it could possibly swing the polls in the wrong direction. I think a lot of people are simply not willing to give the Conservative government another chance. So I think a lot of people are subsuming their actual opinion, which is, yes, this is racist. Yes, this is unacceptable. They're subsuming it underneath that, or underneath the dislike for another Conservative government.
Let's just put this notion to bed that Canada didn't know any better. Let's take a look at the history of blackface in North America generally. Canada and the United States share a great deal culturally. Sometimes it's difficult to remember who's Canadian and who's American. And there is a close relationship with blackface, or minstrel entertainment too, which started to take off in both countries during the 1830s. Performers would use burnt cork or shoe polish to darken their faces and imitate slaves. Over the years, such acts appeared in music halls and then in the movies. The actors mocked black people, often portraying them as lazy, stupid, or menacing.
What's the matter with you boys shooting up that man's hen house?
I'll shoot any chicken trying to follow me home.
Well, why don't you get a job and go to work?
You almost had me a job this morning.
Wait.
Now, in the United States, the civil rights movement led to the slow decline, if not quite the end, of blackface.
Racism is still deeply rooted all over America.
Whereas in Canada, minstrel shows persisted well into the 1970s. But by the 1990s, most Americans and Canadians would have frowned upon this sort of behaviour. For example, the American press vilified the comedy actor Ted Danson for this so-called funny act. And by 2001, blackface was certainly a major taboo in both countries. For example, American universities were punishing fraternities severely after students dressed up in blackface. And yet, in the same year, 2001, Trudeau, who was 29 and a teacher, apparently didn't know any better. Let's turn to the election. By the time the scandal was broken by Time magazine, September the 18th, there was only barely a month to go till Canada's general election, which is on October the 21st. And Justin Trudeau's biggest opponent is Andrew Scheer, the leader of the Conservatives.
Wearing brown face is an act of open mockery and racism. It was just as racist in 2001 as it is in 2019. And what Canadians saw this evening is someone with a complete lack of judgment and integrity, and someone who's not fit to govern this country.
Well, that statement by Andrew Scheer was just hours after the Time article came out and Trudeau's first apology. Basma Momani, he may be a Conservative, you don't like the Conservative Party, but doesn't he make a good point that Justin Trudeau should step down now?
Well, I didn't say anything I don't like about the Conservative Party. But in terms of what his statement was bang on, should Justin Trudeau stand down? I don't know. The reality is he won't, and he's not going to. So what's the point of wishing for something? Look, the reality is,
let's put it this way, Basma, let's put it this way. Within the norms of politics in Canada, has he shamed himself to such a degree that he needs to stand down now?
Look, I think it's an argument not worth having because he won't. I mean, you can wish something. I wish that there was someone else who was representing the Liberal Party right now, because right now there is a blight on the Liberal Party that is awful and disgusting. But the reality is he's not going to step down. No party would do it with this close to the election. There's no alternative at the moment. So it is what it is. And I think that's the reality. And when you come to compare someone like Andrew Scheer, who I don't have any sense of what is in his heart, he may not be a racist person. But the reality is, people who will judge on his past policies, on what he said in the past, it seems that he's still very homophobic, that he's still very, I think, apprehensive about a lot of, diversity policies. And there are people who are afraid that if this party comes to power, we will go backwards to the time when, as Andre pointed out, as the Harper government put in some really repressive things that were highly Islamophobic,
let's go to Chris.
Very discriminatory to minorities.
Chris, pick up from here. If Andrew Scheer was found to have dressed in blackface even once, what do you think the other side of the political aisle would be saying right now?
Well, he would not be the leader of our party. There's no question. And this is where the double standard comes in. Justin Trudeau was not scrutinized properly when he was elected as an MP, when he became leader of his party and prime minister. It's scandalous that these stories, breaking stories during this election campaign about blackface and brownface are not coming from Canadian news organizations. They're coming from Time. They're coming from The Telegraph, which gave us the first in-depth look at the party in 2001 that took place. There is a double standard here, and there is fear, yes, being put about by Liberals concerning Conservatives, but it is not founded in reality.
Thank you, Chris. Well, a lot of people, including those on this panel, have mentioned how the story was broken not by the Canadian media, but by the US publication Time magazine. That's a really good question. Why did it take, let's come to you for a moment, Andre, as you're a journalist. Why did it take a US publication to break this and not a Canadian one?
I just don't think that Canadian publications were looking hard enough, personally. As a matter of fact, I feel very sorry for, everyone's aunts and grandmothers and, storage unit caretakers whose yearbook caches right now are being ransacked looking for dirt on political candidates. I think that when you have, a candidate as, charming as Justin Trudeau and, who basically has functioned as the boy emperor, le dauphin, people just generally liked the guy. And I think that kind of played into a little bit of softballing on him from Canadian media. Well, I think we generally want to like him.
OK, look, CTV and Global News, OK, these are the Canadian media. Both partners of CNN, apparently, released their video within hours of Time releasing its story. Does anyone on the panel find that slightly suspicious? Maybe deducing that they were sitting on it and then felt they had to go forward with it once Time had broken it?
Probably the most likely outcome is that this information was sent to those outlets. I highly doubt that something as explosive as Trudeau and blackface, that news organizations would just sit on it because they like him that much. I think probably some opposition got a hold of it and sent it out.
I don't think we know yet. Today, I was speaking to a friend whose son had heard about these images a year ago, and these are students a long way from Vancouver. So I do believe that there were people with the scoop, as it were, who didn't put it forward, or possibly news organizations that sat on it. We'll have to see about that. But Trudeau has gotten a pass. I think we can all agree that there has been a lack of scrutiny here. Nostalgia in building a brand is a very strong card to play these days. We see the Brexiteers doing that in the UK. We see Trump playing the card of the 1950s and the 1980s. And for Canadians, Trudeau, just the name, evokes this time in the late 1960s and 70s, of which that many people look back to with fondness. So we have to get beyond nostalgia and on to the issues of today and scrutinize our leaders to make sure they're competent and have their wits about them and that they haven't done inappropriate, including racist things in the past. We need to know that in advance.
Thank you, Chris. Across the border, in the United States, the same networks that frequently call or imply that President Trump is racist appear to be taking a softer line with Trudeau.
The shocking scandal, new images of Canada's Prime Minister wearing blackface.
Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau facing outrage as picture after picture is discovered showing him in blackface.
The major news networks headlined the Trudeau blackface scandal, at first at least, but quickly dropped it way down the running order within hours. Not even a day had passed and there was still plenty of fallout to cover, but many chose not to. CNN informed us that
Canadians are getting to a point where they're sick of hearing about it, even though they may have opinions as to what he is.
The US networks in particular turned all their editorial firepower on Donald Trump and the so-called whistleblower scandal. Conservative critics accused the media of giving the Canadian Prime Minister an easy ride. Take this segment from Don Lemon, in which the anchor praises Trudeau for apologising.
Wow, a leader apologizing, that it seems odd, doesn't it? I mean, because we have one who doesn't.
Now compare that with Lemon's treatment of Megyn Kelly, the US presenter who merely questioned whether it was racist to dress up as a black character during Halloween.
She wants to look like Diana Ross for one day. I don't know how that got racist on Halloween.
Megyn is 47 years old. She's our age. There has never been a time in her 47 years that blackface has been acceptable.
Megyn Kelly endured a barrage of criticism until her network NBC fired her, leaving many wondering why the media appears to be more forgiving when it comes to Trudeau. Let's pick up on that point now. Basma, when the reporter there, within a 24-hour news cycle, gives her analysis that Canadians are sick of hearing about it, is there any truth to that?
No, I wouldn't say we're sick of hearing about it. I think we need to make this a national conversation. During the election, after the election, absolutely, because there is plenty of racism in this country, as beautiful as this country is. And certainly, I think for many visible minorities, this is a great country to be relative to some of the craziness we see across the border and even in Europe. But the reality is there's a rise in hate crimes. There's a lot of microaggressions, a lot of racism on the street, in the workplace, in employment. So I want this to be a national conversation.
Andre, does it surprise you, the American network coverage, the way they handle this story?
I mean, not really. It's keep in mind, this is a Canadian story. So if the American networks are dropping it after a few days, it doesn't surprise me very much. But I think the substantial difference there is one, that Trudeau apologized. Granted, that's an incredibly low bar to clear, but he did apologize. And the second is that the issue with Megyn Kelly is that she was trying to dig her heels in and defend herself and say, well, there really was nothing wrong with this.
Yeah, but you talked about his apology. He only apologized after he was caught and exposed as having done it. And in his first apology on the plane, he admitted to one more incident, whereas in fact, there are a number of incidents.
Well, he seems to really love his blackface. Who knows how many more incidents there are. But frankly, to me, it's all spectacle, right? What really bothers me is the idea that in order to demonstrate racism, something so overtly racist has to happen that you cannot deny it. But that is an interpersonal issue. That's a matter of personalized racism. I'm not really very interested in that. I'm very interested in structuralized racism. I'm interested in the structuralized racism, for example, that in Chris Alexander's government was trying to bar women from taking the oath of citizenship if they were wearing a niqab. I'm interested in structuralized racism such that if you are a First Nations member living at the Grassy Knolls First Nation, you're dealing with the fallout of mercury poisoning from a pulp and paper mill that the government's failed to deal with for literally decades. That's what I'm really interested in.
Was that Trudeau's government?
That was actually, this is like 50-odd years ago. But yes, it's been carrying through to Trudeau's government. So Stephen Harper's government failed to deal with it, as did Paul Martin's government, as did Jean Chrétien's government. This has been a very long-standing issue. And Trudeau is just the latest in a line of prime ministers that have failed to deal with First Nations issues, including this one.
Chris, our Conservative on the panel, you must be quite jealous. Somehow Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party are always seen as the good guys.
Well, I'm not jealous of them today because they have been exposed. He has been exposed for what he was in 2001, which doesn't correspond at all to the image that he's been bringing forward over a decade as an elected representative in the House of Commons of Canada. So the reckoning will be with his record, with his hypocrisy, in my view, and with his failure to live up to the values that he's attacked many others for not living up to. And here, I think we need to be very clear that there is a legacy in both of Canada's main parties of promoting diversity, of trying to end racism. I mean, the first Black member of Parliament to be elected to Canada's House of Commons was Lincoln Alexander, my namesake, in 1968, when Trudeau's father was elected Prime Minister, and when there was not a single Black member of Congress in the United States. And the last racist immigration party was in the 1950s under Liberal government. So let's come to terms with our history. Let's try to do better and deal with the structural racism that Andre mentions. It's still there, I agree. But let's also look at the people we are expecting to lead us more critically and make sure that we've delved into the actions that speak louder than words in this case, that in my view should disqualify them for office. Because anyone who's worn blackface ever, in my view, should not be Prime Minister of Canada.
Chris, Besma and Andre, on that optimistic note, thank you all very much. You may have found a bit of rancour amongst them. That's because it's an election year, as they mentioned. You can, though, hop over to the United States for a bit of humour about this story. Let's have a listen to this.
There is some big news out of Canada concerning Prime Minister and man you're about to be surprised by, Justin Trudeau. A photo has emerged of Trudeau wearing brown face at a party. This is pretty bad. And I just want to say, it's not us this time! Suck it, Canada!
Well, you can always rely on Stephen Colbert, can't you? Just remains to thank our panel and to thank you for watching. Remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. But for now, goodbye and see you next week.